My boyfriend, Jake, took his own life after I cheated on him and left him, following the advice of my therapist. I decided it was time to write everything down and share what happened over the last year. It took me a long time to make this story even remotely coherent, multiple edits, a couple of rewrites, and a lot of tears. I used to be a pretty good writer, but I stopped putting effort into it years ago. A close friend suggested I share this here as a way to confess, seek some form of redemption, and maybe warn others. What I did was terrible. The consequences were worse than I ever could have imagined. I know that a lot of people reading this will hate me for what I did and for the events that followed. Honestly, I cannot blame anyone for feeling that way. Even I can barely stomach my own words because I know how unforgivable my actions were. This story is not an attempt to make excuses, just a brutally honest account of what happened. I hope my story gets through to someone who needs to hear it, maybe someone who is thinking about cheating or already has. If this makes even one person stop and think, then writing this will have been worth it. Some might think what happened to me is a rare and extreme case, but from what I have learned, it is not. My situation is not unique, and that is a heartbreaking reality. If sharing this means I have to endure hate and judgment, so be it. If it stops even one person from causing the kind of pain I caused, it is a small price to pay. I am 28 years old, and I was married to a wonderful man, who I will call Nick. About 8 months ago, Nick confronted me with evidence that I had been emotionally and physically unfaithful. Just a few days after that confrontation, he ended his life. Even now, just typing those words feels like a knife in my chest. Strangers will read this and hate me for it, and I get it. I hate me for it too. Never in a million years did I think I was capable of doing something so cruel. Nick and I had known each other since we were kids. If you had asked either of us if cheating was something we would ever do, we would have laughed. But I lost focus. I made selfish, destructive choices. I knew that if Nick ever found out, it would destroy him, and yet I did it anyway. I betrayed the man I loved so deeply that he could not bear to live with the pain. If you think I do not deserve to be alive, I would not argue with you. I have thought the same thing. Twice now, I have tried to take my own life. But for reasons I cannot explain, I am still here. Maybe it is because I need to live with this pain. Maybe that is what I deserve. Nick and I grew up together. As far back as I can remember, he was always a part of my life. Our families were close, and we went to the same Sunday school and public school. He was kind in a way most kids were not. He always made me laugh, and even when we were little, he stood out as someone special. I first realized I thought he was cute in 6th grade, but it was not until high school that I developed real feelings for him. From our teenage years through college, Nick and I were inseparable. He was my best friend, my first love, and the person I thought I would grow old with. After college, we spent a year settling into stable jobs near our families and then got married. Those early years were magical. We traveled together, shared so many laughs, and spent nearly every moment we could with each other. Our love life was passionate. We could not keep our hands off each other. Even when intimacy was off the table, like during my period, we found ways to connect deeply. I threw all of that away for something cheap and meaningless. We had plans for the future, plans to have kids, even names picked out. Nick was my first everything, and I was his. I wish I could say this was some drunken mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But it was not. I developed an emotional and physical relationship with another man who, looking back, was not even close to being on Nick's level. I gave up so much for so little. At the time, I did not think twice about where my actions could lead. I never believed that a casual friendship could snowball into betrayal. Nick and I had what I thought was an unshakable marriage. But no relationship, no matter how strong, is bulletproof. I was foolish enough to think ours was. There is not a single day that goes by where I do not wish someone had stopped me before I made my first mistake. I had so many chances to put an end to it before it went too far, but I did not. I chose to destroy everything that mattered most to me. After our fight, Nick walked out the door, and I never got the chance to speak to him again. I tried to reach out, I called, texted, emailed, but nothing. Every text showed as unread. I doubt he listened to any of my voicemails or opened a single email. Everyone around me told me to give him time and space, but all I wanted was to tell him how deeply sorry I was. 2 nights later, at 3:17 a.m., I was woken by loud knocking at the door. At first, I thought it was someone drunk or angry, maybe wanting to yell at me, or worse. The knocking came again, louder this time. I pulled on a hoodie and opened the door to find 2 police officers standing there. Before they even spoke, I knew why they had come. When they told me that Nick's body had been found, I collapsed. The pain in that moment is impossible to describe. I screamed, cried, tore at my skin and hair. The officers tried to calm me down, but I was beyond comforting. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was sitting on the steps, rocking back and forth, muttering over and over how sorry I was. There was no way I was making it to Jake's funeral, even if his family had allowed mine to attend. They had every right to shut me out. After what I had done, I deserved nothing from them. I was kept sedated for several days after the police came to my door. When I finally came out of that fog, the first thing I wanted was to visit Jake's grave. But no one would tell me where his parents had him buried. They made their choice, and I cannot blame them for it, but that choice cut me deeply. That night, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, I tried to take my own life for the first time. I have since been hospitalized twice for similar attempts. I am not asking for pity. I do not want it. Nothing can take away this heartache. Nothing can even numb it. Sometimes, I wish I had forced Jake to see me before he was gone, just for a moment, to tell him how sorry I was and how much I hated myself for what I did. But deep down, I know I did not deserve that chance. I have to live with the fact that my actions were so vile that even seeing me again might have pushed him to take his life sooner. People often tell me that my betrayal was the reason Jake ended his life. They are right. I do not think there is any doubt about it. Until that awful day, he had been so happy, so unbelievably happy. We both had been. He left no note to confirm that I was the reason, but I know I was. Our lives had gone from bliss to devastation in an instant, and it was because of me. I ended him. My choices, my actions, my betrayal, they all crushed the man I loved. Regret does not kill you. If it did, I would have died long before Jake confronted me. When the pandemic hit and the world shut down, Jake and I quarantined together. I was lucky enough to teach at an elite private school that promised to keep paying us as long as isolation lasted. Jake worked from home, too, and made amazing progress on a big project he had been leading. While the world was filled with fear and uncertainty, we had each other. We made the most of it, watching movies in bed, feeding each other snacks, and playing around like kids. It was a time of closeness and joy I will never forget. I feel so deeply for everyone who lost a loved one during that awful time. What the world endured was a plague that caused so much needless death. But, for Jake and me, those weeks brought us closer than we had ever been. Our bond, already strong, grew even deeper. We joked about how some couples were struggling to spend so much time together, but for us, it was the opposite. We could not get enough of each other. By the second month, we had to limit intimacy to once a day, just so we could get some sleep. Our only argument during that whole time was about doing laundry, specifically, who would clean the sheets yet again. And then I cheated on him. I took that love, that bond, and destroyed it. I betrayed the man who adored me, and that betrayal drove him to leave this world. How could I have been so blind, so foolish? I had everything. I had a life most people dream of. And I threw it away for something cheap and meaningless. The man I betrayed Jake with, I will call Matt. We first crossed paths during group Zoom meetings for work. Matt was the school's lacrosse coach, and he rubbed me the wrong way right from the start. He was brash, smug, and full of himself for no good reason. I remember thinking I was glad I would not have to interact with him much as an English teacher. When we eventually met face to face, there was no attraction. None. We shook hands, exchanged a little small talk, and that was it. I did not sense any interest from him either. In that brief conversation, I learned he was engaged, and I told him I was happily married to a man I adored. There was no tension, no flirting, nothing. Eventually, the school started alternating in-person attendance, with half the students and staff on site one week while the other half joined virtually, switching back and forth. One afternoon during my lunch break, I got an email from Matt. He was working on toasts and jokes for his wedding and wanted my help editing them. I was used to colleagues asking for feedback on their writing, so this felt completely normal. It did not even cross my mind to mention it to Jake because it seemed so insignificant. The email was about his wedding, for goodness sake. I made some edits to his speech, adding a few heartfelt lines about family and toning down the jokes aimed at his brother, the best man. They were funny, but a bit crude for a wedding toast. When I sent it back, Matt thanked me, laughing about how I clearly did not know his family's sense of humor. He said ball busting was practically their family tradition. That was the beginning of what turned into months of back-and-forth emails. But, as strange as it might sound, nothing inappropriate happened for a long time. Nothing flirty, nothing romantic, nothing physical. We did talk about sex once or twice, but only from a scientific or psychological angle. Those conversations were as sterile and dry as a medical textbook. There was no temptation on either side, and I felt safe knowing that. I enjoyed talking to Matt because it gave me something to do during work hours, and I thought that was harmless. We talked about everything: race, politics, religion, science, sports, all the topics people usually avoid because they are too controversial. Some of our discussions got pretty heated. Matt called me a prude more than once because of my opinions about sex. I proved him wrong every time, but honestly, I wish he had been right about me. For a long time, our conversations only happened during work hours. At home, Jake and I had a rule: once we were through the door, our smartphones were turned off. We kept a landline for emergencies, but that was it. Matt did not even have my phone number at first. He got it because, one day, I sent him a snarky email, and he insisted on having my number so he could argue back properly. I gave it to him without a second thought. Plenty of my coworkers had my number, so it did not feel like a big deal. Looking back, I can say with certainty that Matt had no interest in me then. He was head over heels for his fiancée. But about a month before their wedding, Matt found out that his fiancée had been cheating on him with her high school boyfriend for over a year. He was devastated, and somehow, I became the person he vented to. I am not sure when or how things crossed the line between us, but I started to feel genuinely sorry for him. I hated his fiancée for what she had done to him and saw nothing wrong with being a shoulder to cry on. One particularly rough day, Matt came to work looking exhausted and broken. His eyes were red, and I could tell he had been crying. I gave him a hug and talked to him for a while. He asked if I could stay after school to talk more. Since Jake was out of town and I had a couple of hours free after work, I agreed. Looking back, I realized that what drew me into these conversations with Matt was something different from what I had with Jake. With Jake, we had already talked about almost everything two people could discuss. Most of the time, I knew exactly what Jake would say before he even said it. With Matt, things were unpredictable. Our conversations had conflict and surprises. It was stupid and weak, but that is what pulled me in. Things with Jake were perfect. We spent every moment we could together. I had mentioned Matt to Jake in passing, but since there was nothing going on, I never elaborated. Jake trusted me completely and had no reason to pry. Later, when Matt started dating someone new, I felt nothing but happiness for him. Then Jake had to leave town for a 3-week job in Tulsa. While he was away, we FaceTimed every day, and I missed him constantly. But with extra time on my hands, I started texting Matt more often. What had been occasional chats after school turned into dinners and drinks before heading home. It still felt innocent until it did not. One day, I sprained my ankle while going up the stairs to get lunch. The school nurse was not there, so I went to Matt, assuming he would have some supplies like an ace bandage or numbing spray since he was a coach. As he worked on my ankle, I noticed he had an erection. At first, I was surprised, but then I realized he could see slightly up my skirt. I should have been horrified, but instead, I found it flattering. I shifted slightly to see if it would provoke a stronger reaction. He noticed and called me out on it. I laughed and joked that he could work out his frustrations with his new girlfriend. Then, out of nowhere, he kissed me. I pushed him away, but when he kissed me again, I did not resist. We made out for a few minutes before I snapped out of it. I rushed out of his classroom and back to my own, my mind racing with disbelief at what had just happened. I had not planned for this to happen, and I was sure Matt had not either. I thought about calling Jake and telling him right then and there, but I decided to wait. After school, I talked to Matt, and he apologized, saying we should stay friends and not let this affect my marriage. I convinced myself that telling Jake while he was stressed and out of town was not a good idea. That night, when we FaceTimed, I decided to wait until he came home to confess. Jake's job in Tulsa was already challenging. The project was behind schedule, and he ended up staying 2 extra weeks to deal with client issues. During that time, Matt became the person I vented to. I could not talk to my friends about it, they loved Jake too much. I could not talk to my family either. In hindsight, I should have turned to anyone else, even strangers online. But I kept turning to Matt. One Friday, Matt and I went to a new restaurant near the school after work. We sat at the bar, had a few drinks, and talked. I told him how anxious I felt about having to tell Jake the truth. He asked how I thought Jake would react. I said he might want to call in sick the next day just in case. Matt laughed and asked if I thought Jake would beat him up. I told him no, but I knew our friendship would be over, and it should be. Matt then admitted that he did not think he would have gotten through his breakup without me. I told him I was glad I could help and that I did not regret being there for him. But as the realization hit that our friendship would soon end, we both felt a little down. I drank too much. He drank too much. And I ended up back at his apartment. What happened next sealed the fate of my marriage. As soon as it was over, my conscience kicked in. It should have kicked in long before, but I knew then, without any doubt, that my marriage to Jake was over. Jake and I had always believed that while humans make mistakes, some mistakes destroy trust permanently. We agreed that anyone who cheated could move on and find love again, but they did not deserve a second chance with the person they betrayed. Things became much more complicated when Jake came home from Tulsa. I happened to be on my period, so there was no chance of intimacy between us. As much as I wanted to feel close to Jake again, I could not risk exposing him to anything. I had already failed him in the worst possible way. I had written a long letter to Jake, pouring out everything, my betrayal, my guilt, and my intention to confess face to face. I had planned to hand it to him after we talked. To this day, I still do not know how he found out about my affair before I had the chance to tell him. For all I know, Jake may have been monitoring my online conversations with Matt from the beginning. I never got to ask him how he discovered the truth. The fact that he knew before I could come clean crushed me. I fell to my knees, swearing I had planned to tell him everything. Jake did not believe me, and honestly, I would not have believed me either. He had printed out a stack of messages between Matt and me. I did not deny anything. How could I? The proof was right in front of him. But my honesty came too late. Jake packed a few things into a suitcase and left the house on a Monday evening. By Wednesday night, he drove to a shopping center, parked his car, and ended his life. Knowing that I destroyed our relationship was a level of pain I had never experienced before. But knowing that I robbed Jake of the chance to move on, to find happiness with someone else, left a scar so deep I cannot even begin to describe it. I did not just end my marriage, I ended every relationship Jake could have had, every joy he might have known. The weight of that guilt is unbearable. I could go on about everything that has happened since Jake's death, but I doubt most people would care to hear the details. Suffice it to say, his family despises me, and so does mine. My family loves me, sure, but their disappointment is palpable. Their shame in me will never fade, and I deserve it. I never intended for things to turn out this way, but intentions do not matter when the outcome is this devastating. The pain and suffering I caused are on me, and I have to live with that. I see a therapist twice a week to work through the wreckage of my mind. One person I met through therapy has helped me a lot. Years ago, she set a small fire to scare her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend. What she thought would be a harmless prank spiraled out of control, and multiple people lost their lives. Her story and mine are not the same, but we have found common ground in understanding how one terrible choice can ruin lives forever. She is helping me piece together what is left of mine. Things will never go back to the way they were, and they should not. But if I am going to keep living, I need to find some kind of purpose and meaning. That is my story. If you feel the need to hate me, go ahead. If you need someone to direct your anger at, I am here for that. I will not reply to hateful comments, but if it helps you to let it out, then so be it. If you have specific questions, I will do my best to answer them honestly, even if it hurts to revisit those moments. To those who have been cheated on, I know how hard it is to feel like you were not enough. But sometimes, as in my case, the betrayal had nothing to do with you. That does not make it right. Nothing I did was right. But I hope my story can help you see that the fault often lies with the betrayer, not the betrayed. To those who cheat without remorse, I hope my story serves as a warning. You are not just breaking someone else's heart. You are destroying trust, relationships, and a part of yourself that you may never get back. The consequences of betrayal go far beyond what most people can imagine. I do not deserve to preach, and I will not judge anyone except myself. But I do not want anyone else to find their Jake and lose them. I do not want anyone to sink to the depths I did or cause the kind of pain I caused. Love is precious. Relationships are fragile. Do not take them for granted. Do not think you are immune to temptation because no one is. When you love someone, you carry a piece of their soul with you. Betrayal shatters that connection, and it can never be the same again. I had Jake's heart in my hands, and I destroyed it. I will never hold his heart again, and he will never hold me. That is the consequence I have to live with for the rest of my life. This life is already full of pain. Do not add to it by hurting the ones you love. Love is too valuable to risk for anything. Jake's death is on me. My actions drove him to end his life just days after confronting me. This post is my final response and confession. For those who doubt the truth of this story, I cannot imagine why anyone would make this up. This is not for attention. It is not for sympathy. I am not here to defend myself, and I certainly did not write this to feel better. Sharing this has been excruciating, but if it stops just one person from walking the same path I did, it will have been worth it. I have not spoken to Matt since before Jake's death. I do not keep tabs on him, and I do not want him in my life. To those who think I plan to leave Jake for Matt, no, that was never the case. I never had any intention of being with Matt, and I never will. That is it. I will not be commenting any further, but I will leave this post up as a resource for anyone who might need it. To everyone reading this, I wish you happiness and peace in your lives. Above all, treasure the ones you love. Do not make the same mistakes I did.